This is the Westminster Standard Podcast. I'm Ryan Beasy. Welcome. Today we have another all-star panel lined up to talk about, is this a new day in the PCA? Fred Greco's nomination for Stated Clerk, and then two fresh, new, wonderful overtures from perhaps the greatest presbytery in the state of Georgia, Northwest Georgia Presbytery. Welcome. We'll start off with Matt Lee. Would you introduce yourself, and then we'll go in a clockwise direction. All of you are returning guests, I think. Matt, where are you? Still at Kennesaw State, ruling elder?
I am. Hey, Ryan. Good to see you again. Thanks for having me. Ruling elder at Christ Covenant in Woodstock, Georgia, and yes, this clinical assistant professor at Kennesaw State University. I'm told that among the Matts in the PCA, though, I'm not quite S tier. I might be like a C or maybe even a D tier. So, dreaming big and hoping to get up there one day.
Not quite, legendary status yet, but
Not quite there.
And Justin, you're also Northwest Georgia Presbytery.
Yes, that's right. Ruling Elder Justin Ellis. I'm at Grace Presbyterian Church in Douglasville, Georgia, with David Gilbert as our senior pastor. And I'm a first officer at a major airline in the local area here.
Support your local businesses.
That's right. Support your local. Well, and we have a job. Job, you're from Mississippi, but you're in Northwest Georgia Presbytery.
Yeah, senior pastor at Christ Covenant Woodstock with Matt. Just want to say, in Matt's defense, he is a D-list Matt in the PCA, but he is an A-list nursery coordinator. Spectacular coordinator of the nursery.
Wow. If only. Well, and then from all the way on the other side of the planet, a different Northwest, the Pacific Northwest, we have both Millers.
That's right. Living in the great state of Idaho. It's cold out here, but it's good, and we are just about to particularize in a church plant here in Post Falls, Idaho. So we're going to have 3 ruling elders and 2 deacons, normal deacons, no other names to these deacons, ordained and installed deacons, and
male deacons.
Yeah, male deacons, yes. And
is there any other kind?
Yeah.
He really wanted to make me a deaconess, but I said no. So here we are.
What about a gospel worker, a commissioned gospel worker? Would that be
a shepherdess?
A shepherdess? What about potato queen?
Oh, I already have that title. That's a non-ecclesial. Okay. That's a non-ecclesial.
We're okay with those titles.
And anything you say on Twitter, canon will be used against you.
Yes, it will. Well, earlier this month, the Administrative Committee announced that it would nominate Fred Greco to serve as Stated Clerk. Zoe, you did some work for World Magazine. Excellent reporting there a week or two ago on their podcast. So can you walk us through what led to this transition?
So as far as it goes with the Stated Clerk's job going to Greco, like what I learned during the process, or how they chose Fred?
Sure. Yeah. You seem to be the expert on all things Stated Clerk related here.
Well, I appreciate you for saying that. I just talked to the experts, though. So I talked to someone who served on the administrative permanent committee. So that was Mel Duncan. He gave me a quote for my story, and he told me that it was a happy coincidence that not only was it someone we like, because we all know and love the Reverend Fred Greco, but he was eminently overqualified for the position. I mean, in every possible way. So that is what I was told by our good friend Mel. And it sounds like Fred himself has just so many qualifications. He used to be a corporate lawyer, so he's competent to manage business situations. He knows our polity. He knows how to apply it. George Sayer, who works for Ministry to State, told me that he was impressed by Fred's ability to have levity while he was doing it at the 50th General Assembly. And it sounds like Fred just endeared himself to pretty much everyone at the 50th General Assembly. That was a big part of it. So that was him exercising his administrative and his polity acumen in kind of a practice run for Stated Clerk. So everyone seems to be pretty happy about this. Almost everyone that I've talked to has said Fred is the perfect person for the job. So Yeah, that's some of what I learned during my reporting. It was fun.
Our second shortest assembly surpassed, or only
I thought it was the
only the
shortest.
oh no,
Undercut.
Steve Dowling's was shorter. Steve Dowling got us out of there even more expeditiously.
Well, good for him.
Yeah. But speaking of short, it's always short when I'm around. But the tenure of Brian Chapell, you noted in your reporting, was also unprecedented in its brevity. What led to this short tenure of former Stated Clerk Chapell?
So the thing that led to his short tenure was an interview on the Gospel Coalition's Gospel Bound podcast, where he and Colin Hansen were discussing Dr. Chapell's book, which was, I don't remember the title specifically, but it was meant to address tension between the generations. Dr. Chapell and Colin Hansen were talking about how young people do not seek a church that is based on how you vote, which I would personally disagree with, but they were just talking about generational divides. And they were going into a part of their conversation where they were mentioning that there were people who want to embroil the church in scandal. And then in an unprecedented moment, as Dr. Chapell later called it, he held up this sticky note with a list of names that he said were people who had scandalized the church. There are 3 qualifications for the sticky note. He said that they'd either left the faith, left their family, or taken their own life. And there were several names on that list where none of that applies. There were a couple names where I thought, okay, I can understand where Dr. Chapell is coming at here. But in any case, flashing an enemies list on a public YouTube video is not a way to gain any great popularity. And so after that, Dr. Chapell decided to resign. I did some reporting on the sticky note story as well. And, this is not to say that Dr. Chapell can never be forgiven, but, these are just the circumstantial reasons why Fred Greco is now in that chair.
Yeah, it's just an unfortunate situation. But how would you, and the elders on the call, how would you assess how Chapell did, sort of a retrospective of his 5 years as stated clerk, trying to hold together the various constituencies during his brief tenure? Was he a uniting force? Was he just administrative, get the mail there? How would you assess that tenure?
Well,
There-
Ryan, it's interesting. I didn't realize the podcast that he was on where Dr. Chapell showed his list was about generations. But I do think that I wasn't involved. I served as a ruling elder a while back, but I really was not involved beyond our session in another state. But I was at the Twin Lakes Fellowship back when ordinary ruling elders attended, where Dr. Taylor presented the 25-year strategy, or whatever it was called, the 25-year plan.
Strategic plan.
The strategic plan, which was met with a lot of confusion in that group. But I don't think it would be too controversial to say that I think it's probably it would probably be more difficult to serve as the stated clerk today than it would have at the beginning of the life of the PCA from a demographic standpoint. Most people back in the day worked for the same company for 50 years and got their golden watch at the end of their career. And, our culture and society have changed quite a bit. And I think some of the what I would call missteps that were made by Dr. Chapell, might be explained by confusion on his part with regard to some demographics and not realizing how some of his decisions might have been received by a large majority of the PCA, which is, some of the things that he got himself in hot water over the last couple of years that I think built up to what happened at the very end. Anyway, hopefully that's not too controversial.
No, and I think there's a sense in which, in former times, the stated clerk was simply that. He was a clerk. He delivered the mail. But I think the style of leadership that Dr. Chapell brought was more proactive. I want to play a clip where he talks about how he's trying to get people in the room to sort out an issue, and then once it's decided by those people in the room, it's unfortunate or sad, he says, when other people bring their own proposals. Let me get your thoughts on this.
So last year there was a proposal that went through the presbyteries and it did not pass. This year, there was an agreed upon proposal at the General Assembly level. Some of you in the room know this, so it's fine for me to say. I organized people from both sides, try to get them in the same room. Please don't believe what you've been told that person says. Listen to what he says. Get in the same room and listen to each other. And the opposing sides agreed and came together with a proposal for the assembly. In my opinion, sadly, those who were not in the room came with another proposal. Both proposals passed. The agreed to proposal and a proposal that says the desire itself is disqualifying. That proposal also narrowly passed, by about 50 votes. Did not pass in committee, then came to the floor and passed by 50 votes of about 2,500 votes cast. So it was very divisive.
So there you have it. A sort of different style of clerkship that is more involved, entangled in the politicking. Do we anticipate maybe a return to the old way of doing things with Fred Greco, where the clerk just delivers the mail and provides advice? Or maybe that's something we can hope for. Well, what do we know about this?
Hope, isn't it?
What's that?
I think that's the hope that things would. Well, I'll say maybe two things about Dr. Chapell. Number one, I would not have wanted to be in his position to be called as the stated clerk in the height of COVID misery. So that's not an enviable task. So he had a lot of things going on around him, factoring in that we had just not had an assembly due to COVID, and there was a lingering issue that was supposed to be working towards a settlement in 2020, and it didn't happen. I mean, if I'm remembering right, he was nominated, and he was then had to wait a long time because we didn't have an assembly to even take the call formally. So I give him my sympathy. Who wants to do that? So I get that. I would also say another thing is that I don't think, in my perception, that nominating, and I think that's something else. As a side note, let me sidebar, is that Fred Greco has merely been nominated. He's not been approved. The General Assembly will have to approve him.
That's important.
The committee has merely made a nomination, but I think that's important to say because it's telling us something. And I don't think it's telling us something about Dr. Chapell per se. This is not trying to replace or undo things. No matter what he did, what came before in God's providence, the PCA, there was an opening for the stated clerk position. And so when that happened, not because of, for whatever reason, it happened, the men that have been nominated by the General Assembly, approved by the General Assembly, are in this position. And now their responsibility was to assess what is it that we need out of a man who's going to be called to fill this office, this calling. And that's where I think they started. And if they are a reflection of the nomination in their being in their position, they're bringing someone that they think would fit that role. And if he's approved, and in all likelihood he will be, it will show where the denomination is wanting to go and how it sees this position for the stated clerk. And that would be that someone who is highly competent, who's a godly man first, second, highly competent in the scriptures, third, highly competent in our standards of theology and philosophy, which is the Westminster Standards, and also competent in the BCO and how we implement those things. That's what you need in a clerk. I'm sure there's other things, and I'm sure there's more to be said, but principally that's what you're looking for. And Fred Greco seems to pass all of those desires, and he seems like a good choice. And I think that's the motivation here. So what is that? Does that restore anything? Does it take things in an era, so to say? Probably to some degree, but I think it's not, those are not the first reasons he has been issued this call. It's those other things that are the beginning point.
Yeah, I think Job raises several good points. I think it's easy for us to look back retrospectively and say that post-it note, sticky note gate, or whatever it might be called, was a serious misstep, and it was. But at the same time, as Job said, Dr. Chapell was dealt an unenviable hand in terms of the kind of controversies that he had to navigate the PCA through over the past 5, 6, 7 years. Not only in terms of COVID, but then also in terms of some of the major doctrinal controversies that we've gone through with side B homosexuality, and some of the racism stuff that was on that whiteboard that he was talking about as well. I mean, in a lot of ways, well, I guess before I say that, I'll say, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Chapell's background is as an academic, right? He served as president of Covenant Seminary for a time, and oftentimes academics are called upon to editorialize or give their opinion about things. It's rewarded more in academia than it is in other fields. And so that's why you should never trust an academic, right?
And what do you know about any of that, Matt?
Just saying. But I think in a lot of ways, Fred Greco and Brian Chapell actually have similar backgrounds as churchmen leading up to their nomination as to be the stated clerk. Both served as moderator of a General Assembly. I think both have experience on the Standing Judicial Commission, and I'm sure there are other aspects as well. But where this recommendation for the Administrative Committee seems to be, it feels like a big shift right now because of Chapell's tendency towards editorializing versus, I think, Fred Greco's proven that he's very scrupulous in terms of withholding his opinion when it's not asked for. I think if you think back on his time serving as our moderator for the 50th General Assembly, I think it was when we were debating the RUF affiliation agreements and things like that. Several people asked clarifying questions to say, what does this mean? What effect is this going to have? And he was very, very precise to say, I can't tell you. And if I were to tell you anything, it would merely be opinion. And so I think that earned a lot of respect from a lot of the commissioners. I'm sure many of the folks serving on the AC would have seen him handle those issues in that way. And I think his scrupulous attention to detail, again, in terms of not expressing an opinion when not called upon to express an opinion, is what a lot of folks are hoping for with the next stated clerk, and I think will serve him well if I think in the likely case that he is elected to serve in that role.
That's very insightful.
Yeah, I appreciate what you said there, Matt, especially with hearkening back to the 50th General Assembly. And I would say when I talked to Fred himself, he was very humble about what the role meant and how important he was. But the reality is that the weight of the stated clerk's opinion, it's actually quite a lot of influence. And so I think realistically speaking, Fred having the temerity to withhold his own opinion is great, especially in an official stance. But I think he's trustworthy because that he has opinions and he expresses them pretty frankly if you're having a conversation with him, he'll tell you, yeah, I think this is good, or I think this is going to have XYZ effect. But when operating in the official capacity as the stated clerk, it seems like he understands that, it actually has a lot of weight. And so, it's kind of a hard position that he's in because he has to be humble, and he is a very humble man. He made a great deal out of telling me that he wasn't stated clerk until after the assembly ratifies the admin committee vote. He made a big deal out of that, which I think is right. But I think for confessionals alike, we have to understand that stated clerks have a lot of influence and soft power, and I think it just seems like he's going to handle that really well. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the admin committee knew that, and of course they know that, and that's why I think it seems that they started with that from that place I mentioned of this is not voting for the president, a reaction to the previous administration. I hope that's not being thought, because that actually is thinking very poorly of them if it is. And so it's wanting to start there and realizing that, yeah, like back to what Justin said, this is a different time. The denomination's extraordinarily bigger than when it started. And there's a lot of things that go on. And so it is a fresh start more than a transition, so to say, I think, in my estimation of it, that they started there and they found the person of all the people they spoke to. This is who the Lord seemed to raise up the most.
Well, it seems like there's support across the PCA for him. And just to piggyback on some of the previous comments, I recall prior to Fred even serving as the moderator, where he frequently gets to the microphone to help, straighten out the debate, to keep things on track. I think that when I think back to my military experience, the responsibility for and the necessity for clarity on roles and responsibilities, and to stay in your lane, I think that he's demonstrated that. And I think that as a result, we don't know what it will look like. And, Lord willing, he'll be elected at the General Assembly. But if that's any kind of indication, I think, he can be trusted by folks across the PCA.
So what else do we know about Fred Greco other than he's loud, he's Italian, he's bad at math, and he knows a thing or two about polity? I mean, he's got a couple grandkids I've seen on social media. Been a ruling elder. Gives advice, and there's a great collection of videos where he goes through the BCO, and he and former moderator Dominic Aquila do some training for sessions in that video series. So this seems like a man who was raised up or born for this position.
Yeah, and he told me that he intends to present the Stated Clerk's office as the largest resource for the PCA possible. He said that he intends to visit all 88 presbyteries, which may take him a few years because all of them have their meetings usually during the same weekend. But he mentioned that he had made those videos, and he said, he wants to be a resource for people to understand how to use our polity to be most effective in church planting and evangelism, and to just drive the train and just provide himself as a resource. Just because, like Justin mentioned, we are a large denomination. We have kind of an unwieldy way of doing things. And so he just said, he mentioned something to me where he said, if I can use a Pauline analogy, I'd like to be the ligaments that bind the body together, help it function as smoothly as possible. So it sounds like, looking forward, he's going to do a lot more of those things in his official capacity, which I think is going to be really helpful for a lot of people.
And that's what we need in a clerk's office. We need in a Stated Clerk's office someone to bind things together and to provide resources. We need a mailman, not a mascot, in the Stated Clerk, I think, is a crucial issue. But Zoe, you said that most everyone has been very positive. But you did cite in your article, or your reporting, which was in a transcript, Danny Morgan raised some concern that not from Fred, but that Fred's being in this position would unveil an alternative vision that focuses on that focused on restrictions and polity rather than mission and evangelism. Seth, as a church planter, are you concerned about a loss of evangelism and mission because of Fred Greco?
I'm devastated. No, of course not. I think that polity aids evangelism. I think that's a very uncharitable and poor view of kind of what the significance of all this is, because I think Fred really does bring efficiency to the denomination. Everybody's talking about the GA that he ran, of course, but I think in general, and all that he's done for the PCA, it's actually helped. So I called him early on in the church plan, just getting some advice about a few things, and that was about church planning. And so he was helping me to function in that role. And so, I think that we should never divide or divorce these two things, and I think that's a failure to see it that way. But polity actually helps mission.
I think another qualification that we didn't mention, I believe Fred recently taught a ruling elder certificate course for Birmingham Theological Seminary, if I'm not mistaken. So just another example of his willingness to be helpful to others in terms of understanding our polity and working through it most effectively and efficiently. And of course, given his background as a ruling elder and as a ruling elder myself, I'm always appreciative of those who try to help those who have perhaps less, theological or polity training to provide that for a broader audience, so that more men can be empowered to serve actively and effectively in our church.
I appreciate how he already has been a resource, and it does seem as though this is a shift in priority. Whereas even Dr. Chapell would acknowledge he wasn't the expert on the BCO, and that's why they hired a polity specialist in Per Almquist, who has done a wonderful job resourcing and providing help to presbyteries and sessions for those in that area. But any other thoughts before we move on to discuss some of these Northwest overtures?
I'm not sure what alternative and restrictions mean in this tweet, but
I was going to say, could this be projecting? I'm just curious.
What do you mean by that? That sounds like psychology, and I was never very good. That was one of my lower grades at Grove City College.
Like we're going to be too faithful to our polity, or we're not.
My steak is too juicy. My lobster is too buttery.
I mean, or maybe you don't get to do the things you really want to do because somebody might hold you accountable.
I have no idea what was meant by this. I don't know Danny Morgan, so I don't. But I would say that is it assuming that this does mean is he coming from the perspective that I said I don't sense that the administrative committee was doing, that they were trying to respond to something to introduce a new way? Well, it may beg the question of, does that mean that the administrative committee has shifted in the way its direction? There may be an underneath question that's not about Fred that I would ask. I don't know. I truly don't. I'm just saying that I think that I look at it as the nomination of Pastor Greco. If it says anything, it says something about the PCA, not about him. And I wonder if that's underneath what is said there. I have no idea, but
I guess I would say it implies a concern about a narrowness and a narrowing. I've heard recently folks talking about being broad as if that's some, wonderful virtue, but as our culture seems to be going off the rails in so many different ways, to be broad enough, at some point being broad might be bad, might not be good. I'm not sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, at some point you're so broad you're not Presbyterian. We love the Apostles' Creed. We love the Nicene Creed. That's the sort of the base level, the broadest form of Christianity, and we want to be able to unite as much as we can with folks who can confess the Nicene and Apostles' Creed. But we also have to acknowledge that we're more than Nicene Christians. We're not less than that, but we need to be more than that.
Well, and the reality is the PCA was formed because a large group of people left a very broad denomination for certain distinctives, so that now we could re-embrace some of the same things that the PCA, was formed to leave.
Yeah, we tried that, and we've seen how it didn't work. You Northwestern Georgia guys, you've come up with a few overtures that I think are aimed at helping us to preserve our purity, our peace, our doctrines of ordination and um, church office. Which church sent these up? Were these from Grace and Douglasville, Banjo?
The 7.2 and 7.3 amendments were from Job and my church.
Oh, okay, all right. So they were from Christ Covenant. This first overture would limit, would further refine and clarify how we use titles. Why are we having so much trouble in the PCA with titles right now, do you think? Seth, as you are organizing a church plant, you're an organizing pastor, did you have trouble figuring out what titles you were going to have?
Just two of them that Paul gives us in the New Testament. So, I think there's clear language games that are being played, and then there's the optics of language policing that occurs out of that, because words are important. Titles convey, their terms mean something. And so there's been a kind of a tussle back and forth on how far can we go with these titles? What can we do with them? Can we replace biblical titles with other titles and things like that? So I think this overture is trying to address that.
Mm. Doesn't Jesus warn us about seeking out titles or just handing out titles? Doesn't he warn us that not to do titles? I'm thinking of Matthew 23, where you've got people who love the seats of honor, who love these honorific titles in the church and in the Hebrew church, and Jesus says, "Don't do that." So if we have these warnings about being so focused on titles, by Jesus warns us against this, why are we having all this trouble over titles, do you think? Does this signal something about the health of the PCA, that we're obsessed with titles? Or that some people are obsessed with titles, going to great lengths to give people a biblical sounding title, but isn't actually one of those two titles and offices that Jesus gives through his apostles?
I think it's partly a reflection of maybe our cultural moment in terms of some of the cultural trends of wanting to be more inclusive and egalitarian, and as we make progress as a society of wanting to shed away the old remnants of things past, which would include things like mail-only offices and things like that. So a desire to be more inclusive of the gifts of people in a congregation, and then to certify them or officially approve of them in some way by putting a title on those things. And I think perhaps the folks who feel motivated in that direction feel as though restricting our offices in this way are not so respectful of these gifts. But I think, as you showed with that reference, and I would say in places like Ephesians as well, where it talks about Christ giving these offices, these officers to the church as his gifts to the church. I think we ought not to reject those things or think ourselves wiser than God. This is how God has chosen to govern his church. And I think we ought to honor Christ in that way.
The preface to the BCO says, Jesus Christ is king and head of his church, and he has given all oracles, officers, and ordinances to govern and protect the church. And it seems as if there's like a couple of divergent reasons why people are obsessed with titles. I would just say, based on my own personal observation, which is very limited, by the way, the verse that we're looking at, Matthew 23:5, they do all their deeds to be seen by others. I think there's a pressure on pastors to platform women that is coming from external sources as opposed to the women themselves. I would just say, in defense of women who are just trying to serve their church, I think the people who are already the leaders of the church, have a responsibility to gatekeep in a certain sense. And that just the optics of that don't sound really great, and maybe that's a challenge for church leaders in this day and age, is to say, yes, we do need to protect our offices, and it's not a bad thing. But I think pastors sometimes suffer under the delusion that the culture is watching and that they will give them some sort of support or boost, or they'll be more likely to listen to what they have to say because we platform women. And women have a lot of great skills as they already are that they bring to Christ's body. And I just think the pressure is that pastors, if they platform women and they give them seeming leadership titles, that they will be looked on favorably by the culture. And the reality is that you can't give an inch because no quarter will be given to you. I mean, it's an interesting dilemma. I've thought a lot about this just with my personal views, and then being a woman with a platform to tell other women not to be deacons and elders is interesting. But it's just an interesting dilemma. And I think what Matt said about culture being dominant is true. I think the challenge for more conservative voices on elders and deacons is to explain that gatekeeping is actually for the good of the church, and it's not for the denigration of women, and it's not because we don't want to have them participate in the church in any way. And the claim that to give them titles is necessary to do that is false. And anyway, I think this overture is going to be good. I think it's going to spark some good debate if it does pass the overtures committee. And I look forward to hearing about it at GA this year.
Yeah, I appreciate how they even future-proof it with the proposed amendment to 7.3, nor may they be assigned other titles, which by their nature imply the authority of those offices. So you do list a few specifics here that you can't designate a woman to be a deaconess or a shepherdess, which, I mean, that one just sounds silly, but people are actually doing that. But then you expanded it. Look, anything that implies, I wonder, is this just language policing? Seth, you mentioned that we have to police language, but isn't this just language policing? Why is language policing necessary?
Well, I don't think it's language policing.
Okay.
Well, I don't. Well, even if it is, I'm going to say something. Maybe not what you asked. How about that? This is my understanding of this. That I don't know how large it is, but there is a disagreement amongst some in the PCA over using these titles and thinking thinking it's necessary or helpful to do so. And so we have an issue, and it's an issue about various things. One of which is ordination, what ordination is, I think, in its foundation, how it comes, what it means, what it implies, what it allows, what it doesn't allow. And we have a segment. I don't know how large. I don't think it's 50-50. I think sometimes we're too quick to say the PCA is divided, and we think 50-50. It could be division, but it's not necessarily. I don't know though. But I think that we have an understanding and beliefs of the Bible. We have theological and philosophical standards that are expressed of our understanding from the Bible, Westminster Standards, and we have a BCO that implements that. And this division seems that we don't agree just somewhere along the way in our understanding of where, not just what the offices are, but what they entail, what their level of authority, etc. And so you have an option with that. And I'm assuming everything in good faith by all parties, that if you have that and you disagree on it, and the standard says, at least, I mean, our BCO says, well, these offices are to be only filled by qualified men. Then if you don't think that, or think that that's incorrect or something, then that's an issue we have to discuss. Or maybe you think that it's allowing something and others don't think it allows it. So if that's where we are, we have one step is we can talk about it and try to persuade one way or the other. Well, it doesn't seem that we've been convinced on the whole of how we're going to go forward with this. And so if it's something that we can't just let go and can't move on because we don't deem it small enough, you could do that with some things. You could say, it's not entirely clear. We'll just not address it. But this is something that people want to see addressed and think it's important enough on both sides. So if you can't solve it and can't solve it in ways without getting into constitutional authority and such, the only mechanism to solve this is to bring overtures. That's one of the things that overtures are for, is to bring it before the church to say, we can't seem to agree on this. So why don't we propose we do this? And that's the way it's trying to solve it. It's not trying to language police, but it is trying to bring some unity and cohesion towards how we understand the offices, their authority, of what ordination is, of the authority that comes with ordination, and to say that we don't want to confuse, we don't want to do or put it on other people, whatever we're trying to say, we want to have clarity and cohesion on this. And it's not bad per se that when we come to something and say we can't seem to come to those things, we've got to figure out another way. And we have an avenue in our polity, which is overtures. There's others, I'm sure, but this is one of them. So we overture and say, let's change the bylaws, the Constitution, to reflect what we believe the Bible teaches and as it is reflected in our theological and philosophical standards. And let's put that into place. And we should all agree to that. And so that's what it's trying to do. It's not trying to police or anything to say you're doing something wrong, stop. I mean, yes, we would think it's wrong and you should stop, but it's not a reaction to that. It's trying to help settle a matter.
I think, Ryan, to your original question as to whether this is language policing, there's it's obviously a crude term, right? It has a clear kind of denigrating spirit about what it's trying to say. But I think, like you might say that the Ninth Commandment is language policing, right? To some extent, to the extent that language matters, it ought to be policed. Right? So the Ninth Commandment polices our language such that we only tell the truth and not to tell falsehoods. One of the things that I'm concerned about with the extent to which deaconesses or shepherdesses might be pervasive in the PCA, and I don't know if this is the case or not, but I worry that in the cases where churches might have deaconesses or shepherdesses, it's not that the women necessarily are putting themselves forward and saying, hey, I would love to be a deaconess or a shepherdess, but I worry that it's the elders who are approaching these women and saying, you would make a great deaconess or a shepherdess, in which case there's something of a failure of the duties required by the Fifth Commandment in terms of the responsibilities of a shepherd to take care of the flock well in this respect, but also something with the duties required of the Ninth Commandment, which would be to promote the truth in others. I don't think that many of the women that are being appointed or commissioned or whatever it might be as deaconesses or shepherdesses are aware of the kind of controversy that might be surrounding these terms and their use in the PCA. And so I think we ought to be telling the truth. We ought to be speaking forthrightly about what we believe the Bible teaches about ordained office for how Christ governs the church. And to the extent that we ought to be truth tellers in that regard, our language should be policed.
And I wonder, these are just the feminized version of church office, right? Shepherd is pastor, right? It's the same Greek word. It just depends on how it's translated. Deacon, obviously. So deaconess, shepherdess. And on the subject of language, I wonder if, sometimes churches will commission them. What if churches said, we're not going to ordain women to these functions. We're just going to lay hands on them. And we've seen that, right? Where there have been videos and pictures posted on social media of women being commissioned to deaconess, with hands laid on them. And so is it just a word game that some of these people are playing, that no, they're not ordained, but we just laid hands on them to make them deaconesses or shepherdesses, to install them?
Ryan, I was at what is it? Well, Tim Keller's former church,
Redeemer?
Yeah, Redeemer on the Upper East Side one Sunday morning, 10 or 15 years ago, where I witnessed deacons being ordained and deaconesses being installed. Now, I have heard people concerned that about the word police thing, and there may be, this may appear to some as some kind of cat and mouse game, but but the reality is, what do you do? I think, as Job said, especially in our particular presbytery, this is not an issue as best we know, but as somebody who's traveled around the country, who's been a member of 6 or 7 or however many PCA churches, who has seen some of these things in my travels, who has adult children who have a hard time finding churches, and there's not necessarily a safe bet just because it's a PCA church. It becomes a problem, and this goes back to the issue of broadness and what our distinctives are. We hold the authority of Scripture to be something important. I think if you were to look at these paragraphs, the source for where we come up with these ideas is the Bible. So you want to add to that and make up these terms? Everyone here on this call knows the distinctives of ordination and what have you, but I bet you 95% of the people in the pews don't have any idea. And when somebody is presented in front of them and they go through a list of vows, going back to some of Matt's comments about you're setting them up to violate the 5th commandment. They're giving honor to people in ways that they ought not to be giving honor to them. And it's because of 9th commandment issues that you're doing it. And, a lot of it has to do with, it's almost like a form of Pharisee behavior. Let me identify what I think it says, so that I can identify the loopholes that I can exploit, so that I don't have to abide by the Spirit. I'll come up with some little cutesy way, like ordination versus installation and what have you.
Yeah, it does seem legalistic. That no, she's not a pastor; she's a shepherdess.
Well, there was a famous example of a PCA church in New York where the pastor's wife was listed as the pastor of women. And then when that was published online, they changed her title to be shepherd of women. And so it shows that, even though the claim is that these titles are not authoritative, they are viewed as authoritative, and they are intended to be authoritative in most cases. And I think that's the strength of this overture, is that, the addition to the BCO would be, nor may they be assigned other titles, which by their nature imply the authority of those offices. And I think that's the important part, is that, Paul in 1 Corinthians gives us, and in other places in the Bible too, so it's not just cherry picking. We're Presbyterians, we don't do that. But he gives us specific instructions about how the authority of the church works. And the problem with these titles is not that they is not really the titles in and of themselves, but the fact that they at least display to the outside world that we give authority to women in the church, which Paul says we're not supposed to do. I mean, and I've had conversations with people who say, well, Zoe, if we forbid titles for women, then how can you have a nursery coordinator? Like, if you say that you believe this, then that means you don't want the church to be organized at all, which is not true. But by using titles that communicate authority, that's a violation of what Presbyterians believe about authority. Now, having a nursery volunteer or a children's ministry director, those are not authoritative titles. Those are not things that are like mild modifications of what you find in the Bible. Those are necessary organizational terms.
Functional.
So we have liberty to do stuff like that. But when you encroach on these titles that have terms in them that denote authority, and when someone comes in from the outside world, they don't know our polity. When they see shepherd of women, deaconess, they think, this is a church that gives women authority. That's what people think when they see those titles. And, they might have a good perception of that or a bad perception of that, depending on what their position is politically. But that's the nature of it. And the Presbyterian Church in America so far, for the vast majority of time, has not believed that women in the church should hold authority. And there's always been a divergent view on that. But that's the crux of the matter to me.
I was just going to ask, Ryan, you may know this, somebody here may know, but when in the history of the church, amongst faithful denominations, have there been women officers? I mean, other than, in the last 100 years with feminism and what have you, mainly in very safe Western cultures, when has the Holy Spirit failed so that only in the last 100 years we now have been blessed with women leaders?
That's a great question, because it really is only in the last 140 years that it's ever occurred.
I mean, maybe the Anabaptist, I'm sure they had some of that stuff, but I'm talking about faithful examples of the church.
Yeah, there really hasn't been. And even when they cite from church history, the deaconess was a later innovation and was clearly not authoritative. But Zoe, you cite Danny Morgan earlier, and he points out deaconesses are commissioned, not ordained, but allowed to be called deaconesses because, one, it is the historic title in the church, and he references a secular Roman writer, and two, the historic practice with the PCA and the merger with the RPCNA. Also, our reading of 1 Timothy 3 is varied in our tradition. So, Seth, as a member of Pacific Northwest Presbytery, do you see this overture as an attempt by Northwest Georgia Presbytery to impose its interpretation on the rest of the denomination? I mean, has our denomination agreed anywhere on how we're going to interpret 1 Timothy 3 regarding offices and ordination?
I mean, they're restricted to men. That's where we've always been, and it seems like now we're saying, well, that's debated, and that's never been the interpretation of that. So, I mean, this isn't an imposition of a very specific, narrow interpretation of Scripture. This is, a commonly held interpretation.
Well, you guys don't remember Acts 6 where they said, go find 7 men and women? Oh, wait.
That's not in my Bible.
Go find 7 men.
Are you reading the Message again, Justin?
What's that?
The Message.
Oh,
But I think the term commission, wherever it is found in our BCO, refers to officers, if I'm not mistaken.
An authority.
Mm-hmm.
The authority to act on behalf of a court.
Right.
And so to commission someone who has no authority seems to betray the meaning of the word commission.
So far as we use it in a legal and forensic sense in our polity. Can I ask a question? The joining and receiving with the RPCNA, was that considered a merger or an acquisition or neither?
Well, and it was the RPCES, but
yeah, that's right. Sorry.
Right. I mean, he said RPCNA, but I think what he meant was RPCES, and it was an acquisition. I mean, they no longer exist.
Right.
They joined and were received, and so there's historical. Isn't that interesting? But it's our Book of Church Order, the PCA Book of Church Order, that was.
So if it's understood to be an acquisition, then it would be the historic practice of the PCA that prevailed, and the historic practice with respect to deaconesses of the RPCS, which would have ceased upon joining and receiving. Yeah.
Even I think it was Greg Johnson who noted that when Memorial Pres in St. Louis was absorbed by the PCA back in the 80s, they voluntarily laid down their deaconesses because they understood, at least in the 80s, that the PCA doesn't have ordained women as or women deaconesses. So it seems like there's some
Hey,
historic amnesia.
and another aspect of this is from an organizational standpoint, just the ground that we've already given up in these types of areas. This fella, presupposes, like he asserts that he has a right based on this interpretation to do these. Well, we have a particular set of views. Some people may refer to it as white patriarchy or whatever, but the Westminster Standards, which is the lens through which we understand Scripture, and you don't have a right to just simply trump that based on your own personal interpretation. There are places that you could go that probably align with some of the views that people are promoting these days. But, I think just because somebody has a good idea doesn't mean you get to do it.
And I think you're exactly right, Justin. And what people forget is that where there's a disputed interpretation, our Book of Church Order says, BCO 29:1, the Confession of Faith and the Westminster Standards, along with the formularies of government, discipline, and worship. So that's the three different parts of the Book of Church Order: the form of government, the rules of discipline, and the directory of worship, are accepted by the PCA as standard expositions of the teaching of Scripture in relation to both faith and practice. So yes, maybe you can find some secular Roman writer named Pliny the Elder or Pliny the Younger or Pliny the Old who noted that this church back in antiquity had deaconesses. That's fine. Maybe B.B. Warfield held this opinion. Well, that's fine. But the vows that we have taken to the Westminster Standards and the Book of Church Order have a specific interpretation of 1 Timothy 3, church office and ordination. So you're not free to practice it just because you can point to what the RPCES did before they ceased existing because they had no money for their pension fund for their missionaries. It's just absurd to say, well, the RPCES did it. Yeah, well, the RPCES ran out of money. And that's why they agreed to be absorbed by the PCA, because they had no money. So I don't know why we're looking to their practice.
Well, I
Like
think
I
something
said,
else
like,
happens here.
what church practices are most successful when it comes to having your denomination last a long time? I mean, is it fair to make that assessment? Maybe, maybe not, but it just bears, like, if you have a concrete standard that you have to subsume churches under, as far as the long-lasting, Presbyterian churches, the ones that have lasted the longest are the ones that are faithful and require churches to be consistent with their own documents. And Justin earlier mentioned something about how people claim that these standards are white and patriarchal or whatever. And I think that claim is not exaggerated in the slightest. I mean, remember the PCA's, the letter of lament about the PCA, where it says that, minorities and women are oppressed by the, white patriarchal lens of the PCA, or something to that effect. And it's just like, the claim is that being consistent with the documents is something that's morally infringes on other people. And it's a big claim. And I think the claim that they're making is that the PCA ought to allow women to be in authority, maybe in a slight way. But that's not the claim they're making. The real claim behind the claim is that women ought to be deaconesses. But the claim they're making is that women are already allowed to be deaconesses, so you guys should all stop talking about it. But, I mean, the real thing, if they were forthright about their opinion, is that they would say women ought to be able to do this. But frustratingly, that's not what's being said. So, there's a lack of trust between, position A and position B.
Well, and if you behaved honorably, you would do things like changing the BCO to align with what you believe. You would not
And
just
practice.
simply take it, take what you want and do what you want. Never in the history of the PCA, I would argue that the PCA exists to avoid having situations like this. but we're just gonna name it and claim it.
Mm.
Well,
Well, and Justin,
Ryan,
you raise a very important point that if people acted honorably, we wouldn't have to police language. I remember in college, there was a rule, something like no roller skating on the top of the athletic building or something like that, which was a very oddly specific rule. Well, why? Because somebody apparently did it. And it was, well, here, these are oddly specific, deaconess and shepherdess. 50 years from now, anyone is going to read the word shepherdess and think, well, that's absurd. Who would do that? Because it's such a silly word, but people are doing it. And so, when people act like children, they have to be treated like children. And when people are creative and, well, it doesn't say I can do that. Sometimes you have to get very specific with what's prohibited. I think it is a trust deficit.
So when the roller skating rule was passed, did people throw on their roller blades and do the same thing, or
Was it you,
Exactly.
Ryan?
Right.
Was it you?
it was you, Ryan?
It was not I. That was not. That was pre Beezy
hey,
times.
there's something I would offer about this, why I think this is helpful. So if we keep saying, we in the church, we have to always, I think we should remind ourselves regularly is that the PCA is not an association of churches. It's just not the Southern Baptist Convention. I'm not knocking the Southern Baptist Convention, but I'm just simply saying that we are not that. We are a church. Our congregations, our presbytery, our general assembly make up one church. What happens and what goes on, therefore, in one part does have an effect and matters to us all. And here's a practical example why I would like something on this to be settled and for churches to practice what we have agreed to practice and make clear, and for this one to make clear what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do. So when people, and what I just said about being a church is fairly easy to understand. I go through this with every new member that comes to our church, especially if they come from outside the PCA, to state that we are a church, one denomination. People get that. So, and then you start getting into the details of that. They think that naturally, well, that means everybody has the same BCO, so everybody operates from the same playbook, the same rules, right? Isn't that kind of woven into the vows, the fifth vow, that we're going to play by the rules? Well, when we say that, and then we see things happen, we're getting potentially two different responses. Someone might say, does the PCA, because this is how they phrase it generally, does the PCA have women deacons? Does the PCA have shepherdesses? And you want to be able to say, no, we don't. But then you can say, well, we don't allow it. But then others will say, but they're doing this and they're doing that. And you get put in that moment where you're kind of saying, well, somebody's breaking the rules. And they're going to say they're not breaking the rules. So if you go and ask them and say, no, we're not breaking the rules. Well, so-and-so said you are. This is just this is part of distrust, and this is disunity, because you can't say clearly. I mean, you can say clearly, but then there's those who disagree and say it's not clear, it's open. And this is not helpful. And it can be, on the one hand, we can say, well, that's just what our church does, but that's not how we operate, because we're not an association of churches. We would want to be able to say,
Presbyterianism.
yes, we want to be able to say, when people ask very specific questions, and they're good questions, they're basic questions, but good. What does the PCA do here? And if it is going to be varied, at least we'd like to be able to say, well, it varies. I don't want to say that. That's part of why this overture goes up. But be that as it may, we have to give an answer that's not a simple yes or no. That's not good.
Yeah, that's a great summary, Job. Well, one more thing before we bring it in for a landing here. The more money for the administrative committee overture. Justin, is this one yours? Is this the one that you wrote and sent up?
It is. It is.
So you want to overview how you intend to get the administrative committee more money?
Well, several years ago, before the overture that forced the stated clerk to give us digital data. When I did my data dive, looking through the PCA, what is it? The PCA yearbook, the 2020 PCA yearbook. I went, spent about 3 or 4 weeks, 3 or 4 hours a day, manually entering data into a spreadsheet, and then I compiled the data from the 2019 General Assembly, which I very much remember, my first General Assembly. Hopefully, one of the most pivotal assemblies in the history of the PCA, in a positive way, moving forward. But I noted that there were a lot of teaching elders in the minutes as delegates to the assembly that had no affiliation with the church. So you would look at a presbytery that had X number of teaching elders, and then this whole other contingent of teaching elders that had no connection with the church. And I remember asking my very smart, wise, shrewd senior pastor, hey, I think I might write an overture to get rid of teaching elders at the General Assembly to reduce the number of teaching elders. And he said, nah, don't, that won't work. That'll never pass. Well, so I think this is kind of the flip side of that. If we can't reduce the number of teaching elders, well, we can certainly try to increase the number of ruling elders. And I do, actually, someone recently, teaching elder I was speaking with, was saying, you know, I think all ruling elders ought to be able to attend if we truly had parity among the types of elders that we have. But I think that originally, I've had some conversations about this. I believe maybe the idea was that every church, you know, that the average church when the PCA was formed back in the early 70s probably had a couple of pastors and a couple of elders. And therefore, you know, let's limit the representation to 2 ruling elders. But as churches have grown and what have you, I just think that we'll be better off. And as you clearly identify, you can't tell us how much money you need for the administrative committee and then turn away a solution for that. So this certainly would increase revenue.
Oh yeah, I mean, I know of at least 2 churches just in your presbytery that would have sent more than 2 ruling elders if they could have. And one church would have sent 2 ruling elders and a nursery coordinator. But you know, Northwest Georgia Presbytery only has one church with more than 350 communicant members.
Yeah.
But a number of churches, and that's a large church. You know, people talk about, you know, what Ryan Burge describes as a large church versus a small church. But in a way, those numbers don't really fit the PCA. You know, a large church in the PCA, it's, you know, more than 200 on a Sunday, I think, and could probably, how many are you getting on a Sunday morning and evening there in Northwest Pacific Presbytery, Seth?
On a Sunday morning, or
yeah, Sunday morning and Sunday evening.
Probably. I mean, we've grown a lot recently, but you know, 150 is probably our average right now. Yeah, 60 in the evening.
Yeah, so I mean those are great numbers, and that puts you in probably the top 80% or top 20% of churches. PCA, I mean, I think the median, Justin, you would know better than I would, given the data dives you've done, but I think the median size of a PCA church is 100 members.
Yeah, you know, I crunched these numbers when I did the overture, and overwhelmingly, you know, churches that currently can only send two ruling elders. That's the overwhelming representation among congregations. You know, the other thing I didn't mention a minute ago is that as this came back up this year in our session, as I was speaking with my very wise, smart teaching elder, senior pastor, he mentioned that historically this was a very big issue in the Southern Presbyterian Church, the idea of having currently we have a number of people, and I just attended an installation service for a dear friend at a seminary that will be, serving as a professor of New Testament, and I think that's he ought to be able to attend General Assembly. But we have a lot of folks who vote on things that they've got no skin in the game in terms of the local church.
Mm-hmm.
So in most churches, you have more ruling elders than you do teaching elders. And the ruling elders are the ones that, at least from that perspective, proportionally are have their hands involved with the troubles and the challenges of the local congregation. And yet you've got other people who don't have any skin in the game that have the say, have a disproportionate say on how we deal with it.
Well, and I wonder if someone were to take the number of minutes spoken by men at the mics who have no session, who are RUF campus ministers, or church planters, or presbycrats who they work for such and such parachurch ministry, and they're always at the mic, often talking about how they don't understand or don't know how we got here, but versus the local pastor or the elder who's also a pastor, the ruling elder. And I think this is a way, not only, yes, you're right, to provide additional funding, but to provide greater balance to the General Assembly. That we maybe we don't need to hear from the guy who's actually not shepherding a flock on the floor of the assembly. Maybe if he's a great expert. I mean, you referenced David Barry, and we love to hear from our church doctors on occasion. But I think the prevailing weight should be from men who are elders in the local congregation, whether it's a teaching elder or a ruling elder. Have you had discussions with folks in Lawrenceville about this overture? I would imagine the AC would be head over heels at the possibility of getting, even if only 50 churches sent an additional ruling elder, that's still something like $17,000. That's a lot of paper that they can buy. I
did not consult with them.
Well, I imagine they'll be ecstatic when it comes up.
What's that?
I imagine they'll be ecstatic when it comes up. I mean, this could be huge.
I was going to say, I am curious what the pushback might be. We don't like ruling elders. I don't know, but
I've heard some discussions about this idea before, and I think it's often been, we don't know of a lot of churches that want to send an additional ruling elder, so it's not a good idea. Well, okay, but if only 50 out of, 1,700 churches, 1,800 churches, we're supposed to have 2,000 by next year or something with that strategic vision plan. But even if only 50 churches do it, that's still a lot of additional revenue for the administrative committee.
Yeah, and if somebody pushes back and says it will add too many people to the group, it will be too large. Well, that will just accelerate a problem that needs to be dealt with anyway, which is, if we were to achieve the growth that the former stated clerk has said we're on a path to achieve, do we really expect to have, 10,000 people at an assembly? I think we need to be wiser, thinking about Jethro talking to his son-in-law and, how you handle such issues. Anyway.
I believe the quote is, what you are doing is not good.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's practically wise, because again, if you look at the years of participation amongst ruling elders, they seem over time to have gone down. I've wondered, it's like, although now it's back up, generally speaking. I have wondered, why is that? And maybe it's that the number of teaching elders continuously goes up. And every time a man is ordained a teaching elder, he is able to go to Presbyterian General Assembly. So, and right away, there's no like, commission of that. It's just, he's there. That's what he does. And we've not increased the number of ruling elders that are allowed to go at the same rate. So I don't know, Matt, you're the stats person, but I may be saying something that's statistically impossible, but it does seem to me that when you continuously rise teaching elders and they automatically get to go, but you've not raised the threshold for how many ruling elders can go there, that will contribute to being disproportionate numbers of teaching elders versus ruling elders. This allows that to at least potentially be leveled out more, because principally we want to have good representation amongst both teaching elders and ruling elders. And it also, because it limits it to 3, it does cut against the, what Justin said earlier, is like, well, why not allow them all? Well, then you have the other issue, I guess, if you go that route. So this way, there is a way to have a good number of parity. I think if there's pushback, I hope it's not. I'm not sure what it would be, but I suspect that if someone were to have pushback, I think it might be suspicion that this is a ruling elders trying to like come together and do something. That's not it at all. Justin doesn't know anybody. Nobody likes Justin. That couldn't possibly. No,
I am suspicious.
I just think I think knowing who it came from and talks like this, it's coming from a place of, this is a good thing. Having more ruling elders come to General Assembly and participate in various parts of the church. It's good. We try in other parts, don't we? We have to have a quorum of number of both. We're supposed to have equal representation on committees, agencies, etc. This helps bring more of that.
I think to add to what Job's saying, one of the reasons why we're seeing the number of teaching elders grow is that I would guess when the PCA was first founded, you had senior pastors and associate pastors, and probably very, very few assistant pastors. And maybe those guys weren't even going up to General Assembly. But, now you have, I think, a rise in the number of assistant pastors who are working perhaps bivocationally, and they might just be called to work with the youth, or just some siloed part of ministry with the local congregation. But then a church, because that guy's working bivocationally, doesn't have to pay him a full salary. They could afford to call, or I guess I should say the session could afford to call, 2, 3, 4, 5 assistant pastors, and then all those guys are eligible to go to Presbyterian General Assembly. I also wanted to say, because Ryan, you've been saying that this additional ruling elder is going to just raise revenue for the for Lawrenceville, but hopefully these guys are bringing maybe some wisdom and experience and some other stuff to the table too.
Well, I'll leave it to the ruling elder to talk about more than money, and the teaching elder just to focus on the money issue. But and you're absolutely right, Dr. Lee there. But it seems like every other time I hear from Lawrenceville, it's we need money, and that's not a criticism. It's just a fact, and this would be a way of resolving that. Yes, and I'm so thankful for the perspective that our ruling elders bring to the General Assembly. Really, as you note, Justin, that 2019 General Assembly was a turning point, I think, in the PCA's trajectory and history, and it was the beginning of an increasing turnout of ruling elders.
Mm-hmm.
It's also worth noting the PCA's first General Assembly, 54% of the assembly was ruling elders.
Yeah, some lady named Zoe identified that in an article a while back.
I think it's a different Zoe, though.
Yeah, I don't know if that was. I don't think there's another Zoe that works for By Faith.
But in recent years, it's only been about 20 or 30%. So we've seen a pretty precipitous decline in ruling elder participation in our broadest court over the years.
And the court that's like arguably the most important, that makes the biggest decisions. I mean, you would just want. I mean, as a congregant, I want more ruling elders there, because if you don't, like Justin said, if you don't have any skin in the game, you should give some weight to the decision to the people that do. I mean, it's just logical.
Indeed.
It's consistent with the way we operate in so many ways. There's a sense of decorum The presbytery that that's bringing the overture gets to move the overture and so on. Going back to this representation, the folks who have the most skin in the game ought to have more representation.
I agree. Well, how do you assess the health of the PCA right now? Financially, obviously, our committees have needs. The administrative committee is working very hard, and that requires a great deal of funds to pay for the assembly and to pay for the Standing Judicial Commission. Mission to North America seems to be on the road to financial health, even if there are still concerns. I think the new leadership there is engaged very proactively in trying to find out, where did the money go, where is the money, how can we spend the money more prudently. What else as we start out 2026?
Well, it's how we started the podcast as well, in terms of the AC's nomination of Fred Greco to the stated clerk position. I think that shows a great sign of health, and I'm excited to see teaching Elder Greco serve for the coming years in that capacity.
I think John Bice has done a superb job as the interim stated clerk. He's been very careful to stay out of issues. I know he's got opinions. I know he's authored opinions on the SJC. He's signed dissents on the SJC. So I know he's got opinions, but he's been very careful in what he said. He's declined to come on this podcast, and he was very kind as he did. Just look, I just think for right now, the city clerk's office needs to avoid podcasts, and that was he's very gracious. But he's done it. He set a good precedent that I'm going to be a mailman, not a mascot for the PCA, and I hope that Fred Greco follows in that vein.
I see. I know Joe mentioned this earlier about what the divide is. I don't know, but I do think that we're kind of going through an identity. I don't know if crisis is the right word, but a fight for what the identity is. Where of the PCA, where we have a culture that is becoming more and more broad, and you have folks that seem to want to align the way that they try to reach people by being more broad, and things like the regulative principle for worship, I think frankly extend to some of these issues about titles and what have you. So I think, like somebody like myself would say, well, let's be who we say we are. Let's do what we say we are about. These words that we take vows, in support of, that they mean something to us. We don't flippantly take these vows and then just do whatever we like. That there is a connection that we have amongst various congregations, and that as a result, there ought to be a culture of honor associated with that.
I agree with Justin. I think there is, some reason to be concerned about the health. I think there's a lot of reason to be, grateful and thankful to God for His provision for the church. But at the same time, when we see things like the officer title issue, and I don't know that the tweet by Danny Morgan that he was addressing the titles particularly, but when he talks about an alternative vision and this desire for I can't remember the term that he used, narrowing or whatnot. There seems to be a breach of trust in terms of what whoever the alternative is, the other side might be trying to accomplish. So, I think that's some reason for sobriety and perhaps even lamentation. and desire for even greater health moving forward.
Mm. It sounds like we're moving in the right direction, but we're not the only perfect church yet. Well, Seth, give us some good news from the Pacific Northwest Presbytery before we sign off.
Well, potatoes are still coming. Zoe hasn't got me in trouble too much recently, although I think she's going to try to push the limits here and there with a few articles coming up. But yeah, it's good. We're blessed in the church here, and I mean we've been at it for just over 2 years, and just to see the Lord bless a very vanilla Westminsterian plain kind of work with not an especially skilled pastor, just a guy that does what he's told, and that's kind of what we've been. And we just had a membership class yesterday, and just to hear the backgrounds of everybody that's kind of, I mean, from all over the place, new believers, from every kind of color of church that you could imagine in this area. And there's just excitement for biblical simplicity. And I think that's the way forward for the PCA, is just let's get to work and do what we're told, and not have all of these distractions and debates. I mean, they're necessary. We got to have them. We got to get through them. But I think as much as we can get back to this simple, ordinary means of grace type ministry, I think our denomination will be blessed through it. So.
And if people want to support the work of Emmanuel Presbyterian Church, how can they do that?
Yep, just
It's your
go
church
to our
plant.
website, and you can just give directly through there, and you'll get a receipt and all of that for tax purposes. And we're always glad to receive such kind and generous donations, because we're now moving to the next phase of, okay, where are we going to live, long term? So that's always the question for church plants.
And it's Emmanuel Presbyterian Church. It's not in Coeur d'Alene anymore,
Then
or is
Post Falls, yeah.
Post
Yep.
Falls? Okay,
Yep.
Emmanuel Presbyterian Church, Post Falls. That's easier to spell than where it used to be.
Very much.
Yeah.
Well, Matt Lee, Job DeLumba, the Millers, Zoe and Seth, and Justin Ellis, thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks for joining the conversation on the Westminster Standard, which is the podcast of Jude 3. For more information or to support our work at promoting confessional renewal within the Presbyterian Church in America, please visit our website, jude3pca.org. Join us again next time. I'll talk to you then.